Alrighty folks, want to welcome you back for another video from Yates Computers Tips and Reviews. This one I wanted to go through a small little thing that will come up probably a lot in the next videos, is about IPs, your IP address, your default gateway. A lot of these factors come into play on the next few things that I'm going to be talking about in the next videos. So I want to start out by going through and showing you where your IP is to look at what your IP actually is. Because if you have a network set up, you may not know what your IPs are. You might not know what your default gateway is. So when you want to do changes, you run into an issue in the future. So you hit the Windows logo plus S, and it'll give you the search screen. Usually you just type in the COM, it'll get you to your command prompt, or as you saw earlier, because I've been in there before, it's on the list. So you type in IP config. Here it'll actually tell you what you actually have, what your connection is, whatever the name is to that. Usually it has some weird names. Most of the time, like this one, is my Wi-Fi mesh. Underneath that, you have your IP version 4. That is basically the one that goes out to the internet. There's IP6 and IP4. IP6 is usually a local in-network IP. So that's different. You don't even really need IP6, but there's some reasons and some things a lot of people do use an IP6. Your subnet. Subnet separates the traffic on that IP, and between different things it's more technical. You get into security of networks, that comes into play. And then you have the default gateway. It's really kind of interesting because you can see the default gateway I have is 192.168.1.4. That's kind of an interesting gateway IP address. So, wanted to point that factor out because that means I have other devices in there that are in that lower range. So, you can actually configure multiple Wi-Fi routers and multiple other things by changing your default gateway. So, you can go 192.168.0.1 for one. Then you can go for 192.168.1.1. You can go for 192.168.2 and up. And I'll get into some of that settings when you get into configuring your firewall, Wi-Fi routers, you know, other security hardware. This is actual physical hardware now. This isn't the software in your computer. This isn't your security software you have in your computer. So this is your default gateway. This comes in handy, especially when you're trying to connect to a router to configure it. So a lot of times you might get a router, you hook it up, and it'll tell you go to this site, blah 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 blah, and it'll direct you. Sometimes you have issues where you can't, and you have to put in the actual IP address and log into it through the GUI, the web GUI. And those will be coming up here in the next videos. So this is really where I thought it was kind of important to show this part, so everybody can really see what this is and understand what is going on. Why is this so important? What do you see? As you can see, there's the IP6 that I did talk about. It's a big, long, funky address. That's a little bit more difficult to go in and manually input because of all the different breakdowns and all of that type of stuff. So when you get into security, you get into your router configurations. This is where the IP comes in important. Secondary thing for it is MAC addresses. you can actually say on your routers, firewalls, that only devices with this exact MAC address can connect to this device. Or you can actually just do IPs, and you can do a fixed IP on a device. What makes that nicer is it's easier for you to do upgrades and other things, because if you have a new laptop or you have anything else, you just set it to that IP address instead of going back in and changing the MAC addresses. So you have security, but it's not as tight as security, but it's nice. It's that extra steps. How far do you really want to go? You can go and lock it completely down. Is it really that necessary? No. I think basic settings are well enough. You just got to kind of monitor, because the problem is if you lock it down and you want to add a device, you're going to have to go in and rechange all these settings and rechange all these settings and rechange all these settings. Where if you have it a little bit more flexibility with your login, with your security, with all of those type of things that you set up in the upcoming videos with your wireless and your routers and all these other things that you do, there's some security layers there. There's a lot of layers and layers when you come to security. If you get into security, you're going to need a lot more knowledge and a lot more information. Network security, Wi-Fi security, program security, firewall setups, all of those type of things, fire scans, malware. These are huge subjects. There's a lot of detail, and more detail on them. But for home users and small business users, these are some of those little steps that you can use for troubleshooting to find out, hey, what really happened and why is this going on, and why am I having issues with this and why am I having issues with that? Simple way, a lot of times, if you run this IP config and it does not show the proper IP address, maybe you're not connected, you're connected to the wrong network. There's other things you can look at by looking at this. This is a good testing material too. Plus, it'll tell you what you're connected to. This one tells me it's connected to the Wi-Fi, where you might be plugging in a network cable and wondering why you can't connect. That's because you have your Wi-Fi on that's pretty much overriding your wired card. So you're trying to access something shared, but you're actually going through the other wireless card. So this is one of the factors I wanted to bring up, wanted to shine some light on, is your IP address. Because when I get into the next steps, this default gateway becomes important. Like I said, if you're trying to configure routers, trying to configure things, and you plug into it, maybe someone's gone in there and already configured something, changed a setting because they wanted to use it for something and they didn't. You bought it from a second-hand store. You can factory restore it, reset it, but you don't know exactly what IP address. They don't necessarily use 192.168. Some of them use some weird IP addresses. So, wanted to touch base on that. So this is a way that you can verify that. Once you network in to the device, it'll give you an IP address. Then you know the default gateway. So then you know where to go to access that device. So I really wanted to do that video. I hope this is helpful. I hope everybody enjoys it. Make sure you hit the subscribe. There's lots more videos coming out. Like I said, I got the firewall coming up, the internal look at the firewall, and router, Wi-Fi. All of these things will be coming up with the screen capture so you can actually see the screens. But for IPs, this should be pretty much all you really need to know. There's not a whole lot more to it other than changing the IP, and I can go in and show you a little of that, because I did mention how you can do a fixed IP. Give me a little bit. This is Windows 11. I gotta still kind of find my way around in it. you can kind of get the first look at Windows 11 too. Let's see. Get in and change IPs. That's interesting. Here is one of the other kind of major problems I've run across. Is you have your public and private. When you get into a business area, you have your domain that then becomes a factor. And there's huge security and huge different changes between these two. Private is for a network where you pretty much have no internet access, where nobody can access your computer. It has tighter security, makes it so other devices on the network cannot see your computer. Public is the one that blocks it. Private allows a lot of those features. Those are the differences pretty much on those. So on here you can see this is a lot different than I'm used to. You have IP automatic with DHCP. That means it'll assign that IP address. You can go in here, put your address, you can put your subnet, you can put your gateway, you can put all these configurations in there and give it a fixed IP. So that way this device always has the same IP. This is usually done on printers. You'll give it a fixed IP, maybe even scanners, some kind of a network device where you have multiple computers trying to connect to it, a server, any of those type of things, you have a fixed IP. So you can put a fixed IP in there. As you can tell from this one, it has wireless in, gives you a lot of information, gives you the physical MAC address. That is the other feature that I've talked about. When you lock down your network, you can actually say only these computers with this MAC address can access this router. That is really a high end security feature. You can do it. I don't do it. A lot of people I know don't really do it. Businesses and really secure places do that. So that's all I really wanted to touch upon on this video, because like I said, there's going to be a lot more videos that directly relate to that, and that's another factor that I don't see a lot of people talk about. It's basically, oh yeah, you just go plug this in and plug and plug and plug and pretty much plug and play. But what if you want to go in there and log in? What if you buy a new router? A lot of them tell you, even in the manual, to change the default username and password. How do you do that? They don't really tell you that. A lot of them will tell you how to basically log in through a website, and then after that, sometimes it doesn't work because you change the settings, you change a lot of things. So that's the importance of the IP, to know how to get to that. What if you have 2 or 3 routers hooked up? You have them daisy chained, you have them linked, you have them however you have them. There's a lot of configurations you can do. Knowing the IPs are important. Once I get into the router configurations, you'll find there's a lot more things you can do. You can actually have 2 routers connected together, but through the network ports, not through the internet line coming in. And one can actually broadcast out a certain channel, a certain name, so you can have certain people log in. Let's say you have an accounting on one side and you have research on another side of the building. You can have them both on the same router, but actually 2 routers. Why that's important is for your monitoring. Maybe you want to see who's doing what without logging into 20 routers. You can actually plug one router in that'll give out DHCP and have two other routers basically assisting that through a network cable. All IP addresses, everything, network traffic, everything go through one router out to the internet. When they come in, they go into that router and get distributed out to the other router that they need to get to the device that you want to. So that's basically access point video. I showed some business access points. That's basically the same thing that they kind of do. There's some routers out there that offer a mesh unit where you can actually mesh different routers through Wi-Fi. Those are more expensive kind of models. There's total mesh units. Go ahead and watch those videos also. But this is really where the IPs come in play. Because when you get into mesh units and you get into those type of things, IPs also come into play. Those also use IPs. They communicate through bandwidth, and they know who is who, and they know all of this through the IPs and all of this. So that's kind of the important factor that I don't see anybody talk about. I don't see hardly anybody show you how to look up your IP. Those are factors that when you go to do something can stump you, that can cost you an hour of time or more to go research this stuff, to do your homework for something as simple as that nobody bothers to talk about anymore, because I guess they assume everybody knows. So I know I've gone on pretty long on this one, but I wanted to go through a lot of the scenarios that I have found that you need that information. So I'll wrap it up, and again, make sure you hit the subscribe, hit the bell, email people, forward the links out, let people know I'm out there so you can see this information. This information is really important and could be a time saver and can really save you some headaches. Alrighty, I want to thank everybody from watching from Yates Computers Tips and Reviews. Thank you.